case, I took them and was like, let's make a regular Lightning node let's call it the parent node, and then have the ability to share some of the parent's resources and hook them up into these lightweight child nodes. And so the lightweight child node is still a fully functioning Lightning node as far as the rest of the peer-to-peer network thinks. It looks just like any other node. They can't tell that you're reliant on this parent node. And so you have your own set of channels, your own on-chain wallet with your own UTXOs, your own set of keys, your own peers even. So it's almost entirely separate. The main things that you're sharing are going to be the network graph. So in order to route payments on the Lightning network, you need to know exactly what nodes exist and what channels between those nodes exist, so that you can kind of find a route from A to B when you're sending a payment. And so that maintaining that network graph is actually, it can be difficult, and it's increasingly difficult as the size of the network grows. And so by having just one network graph that is maintained on the Sensei node, that just removes a lot of the effort and the resources that are required for these child nodes. So when they need to route a payment, they'll ask, or they'll use the network graph of the parent to be able to find the paths. And the other main thing that they're sharing is the on-chain data.
Welcome back to another episode of Changing the Tide. Today I have John Cantrell. He has created Sensei, an open source project, essentially another Lightning implementation. And that's under the wider umbrella of his new group L2. You can find them at l2.technology. John spent the end of 2021 and most of the beginning of 2022 writing a bunch of threads explaining complex Bitcoin topics really simply for the layman. And I think that really comes down to his desire to see an acceleration of Bitcoin and Lightning adoption worldwide. That is the point of the Sensei project, and you're going to see how he intends to do it with the architecture of Sensei. It's architected in quite an interesting way that I think, will definitely pique your interest. One thing to note with John is that he has been studying Bitcoin for over a decade, and so there's a ton of just expertise that goes in, but then he's also hooked his project into the open source Bitcoin development kit and Lightning development kit projects. I had Connor Okus from Spiral, who actually gave a talk at Adopting Bitcoin last November in El Salvador on the Lightning development kit and what it brings to people who are developing on both Bitcoin and Lightning. And so John illuminates even more what Bitcoin and Lightning development kits are, but overall an open source project that is very focused on increasing the adoption of Bitcoin and Lightning worldwide is something that I would love, that I always love to talk about on this show. And so to have John on here to talk about that is super exciting. And let's get started. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have you today, not least wise because session 9 of this podcast, we had Connor Okus from now Spiral Bitcoin, who talked a little bit about BDK and LDK. And that is something that you've highlighted on your new Sensei project and L2 that you are taking advantage of. So excited to dive in. As we begin, we've got the Clark Moody Bitcoin dashboard. We're starting at block height 724,654. There are currently 9.68% of all Bitcoin that will ever be issued, yet to be issued. So we're over the 90% threshold. Reachable Bitcoin nodes, 15,153. Over half of those are running Tor. And then the Lightning network, there are almost 20,000 nodes, 19,980. There are over 75% of those running on Tor. Super important in these days on the privacy side. And if John has anything to say about it, there will be far more Bitcoin and Lightning nodes here coming soon. So John, tell us about Sensei.
Yeah, I guess where to start. But I guess at the highest level, Sensei is a new Lightning node implementation that's based on, like you mentioned, the BDK, the Bitcoin Development Kit, and the Lightning Development Kit, the LDK projects. Um, Both separate projects, but one of the goals is to be able to use them together, like I have in Sensei. And so you can think of Sensei sort of at the same level of like an LND or a C Lightning or an async. So it's like a packaged Lightning node implementation. The protocol specifics aren't like re-implemented by me. That's what, the advantage I get from using the LDK project. So all of the internals and the P2P networking and the channel management, all that stuff is taken care of by LDK, and I kind of packaged it together with BDK to provide on-chain wallet functionality, and then added my own things like HTTP and gRPC API layer so that you can control your node remotely or programmatically. Added things like encrypting the seed to disk and recovery flows and things like that. And then the kind of web-based admin to manage the node, similar to something like uh, Ride the Lightning or Thunderhub or I guess Zeus, but this is going to be currently web-based. And so at the end of the day, it is another fully functional standalone Lightning node implementation. But one of the angles I am taking with it is kind of this focus on onboarding, and kind of like the introduction to Lightning and making those flows as seamless and easy as possible for new users. And so what you'll see is a handful of features coming down the pipeline focused on that core functionality. And kind of the first one that I launched with was this lightweight child nodes functionality that you probably saw advertised on the website. And so the idea there is because of LDK,
Mm-hmm.
they let you build a node specific, like tailored to exactly your use case. So it's not like taking LND or C Lightning and building on top of their APIs. With LDK, you can you pick and choose all the individual components and wire them up exactly how you need them. And so in this case, I took them and was like, let's make a regular Lightning node let's call it the parent node, and then have the ability to share some of the parent's resources and hook them up into these lightweight child nodes. And so the lightweight child node is still a fully functioning Lightning node as far as the rest of the peer-to-peer network thinks. It looks just like any other node. They can't tell that you're reliant on this parent node. And so you have your own set of channels, your own on-chain wallet with your own UTXOs, your own set of keys, your own peers even. Like, so it's almost entirely separate. The main things that you're sharing are going to be the network graph. So in order to route payments on the Lightning Network, you need to know exactly what nodes exist and what channels between those nodes exist so that you can kind of find a route from A to B when you're sending a payment. And so that maintaining that network graph is actually, it can be difficult, and it's increasingly difficult as the size of the network grows. And so by having just one network graph that is maintained on the Sensei node, that just removes a lot of the effort and the resources that are required for these child nodes. So when they need to route a payment, they'll ask or they'll use the network graph of the parent to be able to find the paths. And the other main thing that they're sharing is the on-chain data. So the other piece of Lightning is you have to constantly be monitoring the base chain to make sure that your counterparty isn't trying to do play funny games and broadcast old states where they might lose all their funds, or maybe they'll close the channel on you, and so you need to be able monitoring the chain, and monitoring the chain can be pretty heavy because you often need to run a Bitcoin Core instance, which we all know takes a lot of bandwidth and disk space, and so being able to share that across all these lightweight nodes also helps them stay extremely light in terms of like resource utilization. Um, so I guess I hope that kind of
Wow.
gave a little bit of background of Sensei and one of the cool features of it, which is these lightweight child nodes, which kind of utilize the fact that LDK lets me put together the components in such a way that I can share those heavy resources with the parent node.
Okay. So have some so many questions here, but let's start here. You
Mhm.
mentioned LND versus C Lightning. So did I hear correctly that your node will allow essentially Sensei will allow you to choose which implementation you're running, or it doesn't need either of those implementations.
Yeah, that's correct. It needs neither of those implementations. The whole point is it's a new implementation that is comparable. You could think about it like your mental model of what Sensei is that it's essentially, a less mature, since it just came out, but a version of LND or C Lightning. So you don't need to connect it to your LND, or you don't need to connect it to your C Lightning node or async node. It is by itself a standalone, full-fledged Lightning node, and that's largely due to the LDK, implementation of it.
Wow. Okay. So mind blown there. You're in a way you're committing with this project to further decentralizing the reliance on any particular implementation. Well,
Yeah, that's a great point. That's one of the, yeah, no, it's, well, other than LDK, yeah. But that is one of my motivations behind this. I think that it's because of Lightning Lab's great job with the development ecosystem they've been building and all the APIs they had since the very beginning. But it seems like, I don't know the numbers. Maybe someone has the data that they can share later. But it feels like, from my perspective, that a large percentage of the network is LND. It's almost entirely LND, and and that's, it's an amazing product they put out, and a lot of services like Loop and Pool around it, to help people operate on Lightning efficiently. But it does feel like it would be nice to have a couple other options out there that actually have some kind of market share, because we want to have, Bitcoin is all about having options, and making sure that one entity doesn't really, not that they control Lightning in any sense, right? They don't really have, it is free and open source, and obviously, I guess they could change their mind or something, but it doesn't seem likely. So anyways, I think having another option out there, that has that offers some different set of functionality is important for the ecosystem.
yeah, yeah, and essentially the decentralization of the like implementations. There's a huge benefit to that. I've heard upwards 80+% of implementations being run are L&D. So it's an attack vector at the very least, even if that attack is not from within. So
Hmm.
that's very interesting.
Yeah, I would have
Okay,
guessed around there. Yeah.
yeah. You also mention on the website for Sensei and L2 that this is open source and will always be. So tell us about just your motivations behind that. I think we heard a little bit about it, but I'd love for you to expound on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be expected in Bitcoin that the core softwares and protocols you're running are free and open source. I think someone trying to release a closed source Lightning node or Bitcoin wallet implementation is a non-starter. Who would use that? I mean, I would never touch it with a 10-foot pole. I mean, uh, and then you don't. It's funny in a little, funny in some sense, because you don't really expect people to actually, most people at the end of the day can't go ahead and review the source code to make sure nothing funny is going on. That's just too much to ask of the general public. And even, the most experienced developer, it's quite a task to like dig into a new project and understand the code base and enough to actually do a sufficient review. It's quite a lot of work. And so it's funny that like everyone demands it to be free and open source, as they should, but at the end of the day, I think people still end up trusting the fact that it is open source means that there's no funny business going on. And so um, I guess it's kind of back to this ethos that I like within Bitcoin, is that there's the option. You always have the option. Like at the end of the day, a lot of people are going to end up using custodial solutions, like Cash App, that make it really convenient and easy to use for the masses. Um, and I think that's okay as long as there's the option to opt out. They need the ability to take control of their keys, and take control of their privacy, and really opt out if they need that. And so with open source, I feel like it's sort of the same idea, is like maybe you trust it for now, but if you ever needed to, you could go in and perform a review or hire someone to do a review. It's sort of that same option. You have the option to do it. Whereas if it's closed source, you're really just trusting that they're not doing all sorts of nefarious things with your information and your money.
And as we're finding out from multiple sources, multiple companies that have walled garden environments. They are what they're gathering, and what they have on you is pretty significant in terms of like your security and threat models, right? It's like you don't know where information is going in some of these walled garden environments. I mean, you have an idea, but you know, the free and open source model, you can read everything and you can see exactly what the underlying software is doing. So
Mhm.
that's a huge contribution to the space. Um, so L2 in general is kind of the overarching, I guess, organization. Do I have that right, John?
Yeah, the idea was I have in mind a handful of products and services that are related and will probably utilize Sensei in some capacity. And so I just wanted to put together some kind of wrapper around what those will be. Sensei by itself wasn't going to be the only thing that I put out. And so yeah, L2 is essentially an organization, sort of like a lab style company that will put out products and services that help accelerate the adoption of Bitcoin. Um,
Well,
and
congrats.
Sensei is just the first of many.
Nice. Congrats on the announcement. Then that was just a couple weeks ago. Um,
Mhm.
I think following up on it, pretty. You spent. I think it was close to 30 days just writing daily on some simplifying some of these complex topics
Mhm.
in Bitcoin. Um, you like when you teach someone. I used to be a teacher in a former life. When you teach someone, distilling it down simply, oftentimes is actually like the biggest learning piece. So out of all of those threads that you have on your Twitter, and I'll post that to the show notes. But on your Twitter, the first pinned tweet is pretty much most of those threads. What
Mhm.
was some of your biggest learning going through that constant writing and simplifying these complex Bitcoin topics?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say which Bitcoin topic, but I think I learned that writing is really difficult. I sort of knew that. I mean, that was sort of part of the motivation behind the idea was that I've always throughout my life hated writing. You know, being like the math and engineering guy, you typically don't like. I mean, for my limited view of those types of people, including myself, they typically are the opposite of the like English and artsy types, and so I've always hated writing, and I thought I was bad at it, and it does seem like an extremely useful skill, and so it's something I've always wanted to get better at. Um, and so that was part of the motivation behind the 30-day thread. I was like, all right, new year, let's try a challenge. I'm going to write for an hour every single day for 30 days and see what happens. And so, what do I write about? Well, I guess I've spent the last 10 years, studying and learning and tinkering with Bitcoin. Why not try to distill some of these topics into Twitter threads that maybe will be helpful to people. And at the same time, yeah, maybe find holes in my knowledge or places that I didn't realize you know, uh, obviously like Bitcoin is like this never-ending rabbit hole that there's always more to learn. There's always another angle to look at it, and so even it's crazy. It's like I've literally been dealing with Bitcoin for almost a decade now, and I still feel like there's so much I don't know. And I'm just like I look at some of these altcoins and other chains and people working on all this other stuff. I'm like, how do they like? I still don't really understand Bitcoin. I feel like after 10 years, and you're over here doing, I don't know, staking with chain swaps and I don't know what all crazy stuff they're doing. I'm like, there's no way these people understand what's going on over there. And so, yeah, it just really humbles you and makes you realize how little, well, I guess there's a lot you do know after 10 years, but it's impossible to know everything. And, but I think, I'm not sure if you just said this, but it's often said that like when you're able to explain something simply is a kind of a test to know that you really understand it. And so I also went through a lot of these questions as like, let me make sure, like I would just try to explain them from memory, like from, just from memory basically, and make sure that, um, just really test my understanding. But in terms of which ones, um, shocked me. There was nothing that really like was like oh, I don't understand this, or I didn't. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of, because I was picking the topics, so I sort of picked things that I already felt somewhat comfortable with. So I don't think there was like a big learning for me outside of understanding that committing to writing every day for an hour is a big challenge. It's harder than it might seem.
Yeah, if you know, yeah, there's that kind of idea that math and science and engineering people, aren't writers, and writers aren't
Yeah,
math and engineering people. And
yeah. It's like I don't know if that's true, but yeah,
yeah, yeah. Well, I think you proved it because they are. I'm going to post them because for people who are new, I mean, part of my show is I hope it reaches out to anyone, whether they're a
Mhm.
beginner all the way up to someone who has a decade or more of experience. And but I think what was so interesting was you did a thought experiment on onboarding 7.753 billion people,
Yeah,
and how long would it take? And we went from like 4.7 years in one scenario down to I think it was 172 days using multi-party channels, and
yeah. Well, it
so
starts at
that
like 18 years or something at the base case, I think. And
18
that's kind of
years.
yeah, it's a good one. That was one of the most popular ones, which is why I put it at the top of the Twitter thread on my pinned tweet there. But it got a lot of there's a lot of debate around it, and I got a little bit of I don't call it hate mail, but there's some criticisms, some fair criticisms of it. If we can dive into it a little bit if you want.
Yeah,
But yeah, basically at the end of the day, I thought it was actually kind of promising. The idea behind it was just to get a sense for what is possible today, what might be possible in the near term, and like how far is it from what is really needed to actually onboard the entire world to Lightning and Bitcoin. And I think my takeaway from it is that well, I guess let's just go through some of the basics first. The first example was just using a single, like normal channel opens. So when you open a channel on Lightning, you have to do a single Bitcoin transaction. And best case scenario is it takes one of your inputs and funds the channel in the 2 of 2 multisig as the single output, and there's no change or anything needed. And so you just have one input and one output. That's sort of like the smallest transaction you could get. And I think I don't have the thread pulled up, unfortunately, but I think that takes doing that means it takes roughly, I think it's 18 years, something like that,
yeah. You
to
said
onboard.
17.8 years.
Okay. Yep.
Because per block, every 10 minutes doing that, you could onboard 8,264 people to Lightning every 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So,
And so obviously there's lots of unrealistic assumptions being made that you could actually use 100% of the block space for 18 years. That's clearly not possible since Bitcoin is a global ledger and used for all sorts of purposes. But I guess in theory, if you paid enough, you could probably actually do it, or at least close. Anyways, that's just like the kind of base case is how long it would take, 18 years, which honestly it also comes down to like how long is it going to actually take and how long like what percentage of the world will actually want to have custodial Bitcoin. um, and so maybe 18 years is right. I don't know. Anyways, the next improvement you can do is batching. So you've actually seen this a lot just on main chain, with normal usage where exchanges and other companies that were allowing customers to withdraw, like in the years past, they wouldn't implement batching, and they would say like if you want to withdraw money from an exchange, they would just send you a single transaction and with your withdraw amount to your Bitcoin address, and every single person on the exchange that wants to withdraw, they would do the same. So each withdrawal was creating a single transaction, and this kind of bloated the Bitcoin base layer and cause fees to more easily spike and things like that. But over the years, I think now most of the exchanges do this batching. And the idea behind batching is you can make a single transaction. So it could have one input from their hot wallet and then one output per user that's withdrawing. So they could wait every 15 minutes. They basically batch withdraw everyone that put in a request in the last 15 minutes. And so maybe there's 1,000 people that withdrew, and they can have one transaction that pays 1,000 people. And this is a much more efficient use of block space. And so you can actually do the same thing with channel opens. So maybe an exchange could do this. They could have an option where it says withdraw to Lightning, and they're going to open a Lightning channel for you as your withdrawal. And so they could batch, 1,000 people, in a single transaction, and all the outputs are actually funding their channels. And so you could do the same trick essentially with channel opens and do one transaction that opens thousands of Lightning channels. And I think this gets roughly a 4x improvement, and so it drops it down to something like just under 5 years to onboard 7.7 billion people. So that's actually really promising because that doesn't need any new technology. That's something we could do today. And 5 years to get 100% of the Earth is really reasonable, I feel like, because in reality, like I said, I don't think, a large portion of the population is probably going to use custodial solutions, at least to start. Like Cash App now rolled out Lightning. So someone could use custodial Lightning on Cash App and still use the Lightning network. Just, for now they're trusting Cash App, which they already do for their fiat money. So it's not that big of a stretch. It's kind of a great way to start. And I think, again, this thought experiment assumes that 100% of the Earth wants to come onto non-custodial Lightning today, which is not, it's just not reality. So it kind of goes in both directions with the flexibility here. And I think 5 years to get 100%. What if we only need to onboard 30% of the world over the next 20 years? Well, maybe the 5 years worth of block space over 20 years is actually reasonable, and maybe we could do it. And so it sort of made me feel optimistic that this is actually possible without any new technology. And then the third thing I explored, which isn't actually the last, there are some other ways we could optimize this further, but the last thing I explored was this idea of multi-party channels, which is also technically possible to do today. It's just no one has implemented it because it's extremely complicated to implement with today's Bitcoin technology. And so the idea is basically today, Lightning, you open a channel between two people. So me and you might open a channel and we can send money back and forth for free, or I can send money to someone else by routing through you. And the idea of a multi-party channel is similar to a multi-sig in that you could have more people in it. We could open a channel with 10 people in a 10 of 10 multi-sig. And now we all have this Lightning channel. I guess it's hard to visualize. Maybe it's more of like a star or something. And we could send money between all of us for free, and then route through each other, I guess, out to the network, to the rest of the network. It gets complicated because of some technical reasons around how Lightning works. This penalty mechanism I talked about is one issue. Like we need to be able to monitor for people cheating and penalize them, and you also need to like maintain all these old states, and there's just a lot of data that needs to be kept around, and it gets really complicated from like an engineering perspective to implement. But luckily, there are some proposals for a new way to do Lightning if we get a specific soft fork in the future called, unfortunately named because of the L2, but it's called L2, ELTOO. And it basically removes a lot of the complexities that today's Lightning have and will allow these multi-party channels to be done a lot simpler. And so that's really exciting. And with that, you can have as many people as you want in these channels. Theoretically, you could have 10, 100, 1,000 people sharing a channel. And the size on chain is still just the one output per channel. So you can, because of signature aggregation, which we just got with the Taproot upgrade, means that you could have 100 or 1,000 people in a single channel, and it would still be represented on chain with a single multi-sig address. And so you basically instantly get this like 10x or 100x or 1,000x scale. So that 5-year number can quickly drop to half a year or a tenth of a year or whatever. It's not as rosy as I'm making it sound though, because of two reasons. One, there's still some kind of like social coordination problem with setting up a multi-party channel, right? There needs to be some kind of coordination between all these people, and that's hard to do. So you would need something like maybe like how Wasabi coin joins work, where it's like they're coordinating all these people into a single coin join transaction. You probably need something that would help coordinate it, like an exchange maybe could do it. The other big problem, the elephant in the room, why you might get some flack for what I said, is it sort of just delays the problem to the closing of this channel. Because now you have 1,000 people in the channel, and if it wants to be closed, now you need to create 1,000 outputs, one for each person in the channel. So you sort of just push the problem to the future. you don't really solve the problem. Everyone will still need a UTXO eventually, unless the channel never closes, which maybe that's some kind of future state we end up where Lightning is just sort of um, something you stay in. You don't close the channel. The channel is able to be rebalanced or spliced or something such that it can be extremely long-lived, and you really don't close channels very often. Or another idea is that maybe when you close a channel, you're actually at the same time joining another one of these huge 1,000 people channels, like a new one. So you're sort of like just hopping from channel to channel, and you always are sharing UTXOs with all these people. I'm not sure, but it's again, it's a thought experiment, and it is a possibility to at least onboard them to Lighting. Getting them off is another problem. So yeah, I hope that helped explain that thread. That was a good one for sure.
Yeah, it did. I mean, following the thought experiment through and thinking to, well, maybe lightning's something we stay in, and the social coordination problem is
Mhm.
more like the threat of an on-chain close
Yeah.
is maybe enough to keep everyone. If we can solve that problem.
Yeah, I mean the issue though is like it's not, is it really your Bitcoin then if you can't actually go like one of the nice things about Lightning is that it lets you do these fast, cheap transactions, but and there's no like trust because worst case scenario you can just go to chain and everything will be settled correctly. But if in this future that we're describing you can't go to chain because it's too expensive or there's not enough UTXO, like you can't close the channel easily, then it sort of comes back to like maybe it's like a semi-trusted model, and that's not really what we want. So I think you need to be able
Yeah.
to close reliably. Otherwise, you can run into some
Yeah.
problems.
Running into similar trust issues, and you go back to the white paper and the whole thing is trying to eliminate trust. So
Right. Yeah, we don't want to do that. Trying to stay far away from that as possible, though I think it has its place, which is another angle of Sensei that we didn't really touch on, that I could go into, which is that it sort of also a use case for it is this like Uncle Jim model, this idea that not every person is going to be technical enough or care enough to run their own Lightning node because you need to be able to manage its uptime. You need to be manage its liquidity. You need to, maintain the server and, all this stuff like have a backup power supplies and backup internet, maybe if you want to have like perfect uptime. So it ends up becoming like this system admin or like DevOps type of job where you really need to know what's going on to have like a really reliable node. And so that's not going to be for everyone, I feel like, since that's not for everyone today, and we quickly outsourced running web servers to the cloud. Um, but but you might know someone who is that type of person, runs a node on plebnet or runs their own LND setup today, and so that type of person could run a Sensei node and provide nodes for their friends, their family, and their local communities. And so the idea is that maybe, you trust you trust your friends, you trust your family, and maybe you trust some people in your community. And so that with that little bit of trust, like you trust them more than you do maybe Coinbase or your government. And so because there's a little bit of actual in real life trust there, uh, there are some cool tricks you can do with Lightning and Bitcoin in general, just to ease that onboarding, right? With when there's a little bit of trust, you can do things like these multi-party channels and say, oh, if I can't close it, it's okay because I trust everyone in my pool or something like that. Um, but that is like a potential use case essentially of Sensei, and it's similar to like what the people at Galoy Money are doing, where they're sort of, I think today, I don't actually know, so I'm sorry if I get this wrong, but I think they're running LND with like an LND hub or something very similar to that. And so you can kind of think of Sensei similar in that it lets you run these like child accounts essentially, except in LND Hub's case, all the sub accounts aren't actual nodes, they're just entries in the database that are basically keeping track of uh, the balance they have essentially, and it gets updated as they route payments. And they all are just using a singular node. And in Sensei's case, you can kind of have that same setup, but all of the users actually have their own full Lightning node, which means they can open their own channels. They have a little bit more control, a little, I would say maybe a little more privacy, but maybe not in today's version because it's all run on the same machine. So technically, I think the admin would be able to kind of see what's going on, in but at least you have more flexibility there. And one of the ideas behind Sensei is that in, when the users are, it sort of helps them get started. And then when they're ready or they want to take the next step to take full custody of their Bitcoin, they can kind of eject from the Sensei node and start their own Sensei node. And it makes that process really seamless. So you might have seen that like animation. That was what I was trying to capture in that animation on the website. It's kind of like there's the single Sensei node. It spawns a bunch of children, and then over time, those children go off on their own and disconnect from the Sensei. They're no longer like the student becomes the teacher type of idea, and they can then go off and be their own Sensei for their own group of friends and family. So that was sort of the idea. I think it's kind of a cool one, and that's yeah, it's another model that I'm exploring.
Yeah, because you say sensei, one who comes
Right.
before. You give that kind of,
Yeah.
and so that was interesting. That was one of the
Mm,
questions I was going to dive into, and very interesting where people who can't spin up the full implementation themselves, they can still rely on one that has like um, the network graph and that sort
mhm.
of thing, but they don't have to do all of the site reliability engineering
Right.
work to to keep that thing up and
Mhm.
running. Well, that's an interesting implementation. Thanks for that clarity. Um, we talked a lot about the connectivity in that particular Twitter thread that you were talking about, and how do we onboard a lot of people. Um, Interestingly enough, just read an article today from Roy at Breeze on the uh, the current real big scarcity constraint actually being liquidity. So curious your thoughts on that. If Sensei will touch on that at all, or what does it have in it that might help
Mhm.
with that? Um, would love to dive in
Sure,
there.
yeah. So I haven't actually seen this article yet, but I'll be sure to read it. It's definitely an area that I am very interested in and exploring how to help there with Sensei. And so I think without reading the article, what I would guess Roy is talking about is sort of this. It's sort of a problem I've been thinking about for a long time now. Is this onboarding onto Lightning or Bitcoin in general? It's like there's so many steps in the process. You need to first care and learn about Bitcoin, understand why you want it, and then actually go and acquire some somehow, whether you're buying it from an exchange or some peer-to-peer method or mining it. Um, so great, now you got Bitcoin, and then you have to then you hear about Lightning and you want to be able to move money faster and cheaper. So now you need to set up a Lightning node, and then you do that, and then you fund your Lightning node, you move your Bitcoin to this Lightning node, and now it's like, okay, now what? Now I have to open a channel. Okay, great. And so now you open a channel with someone who, I don't know, it's another tough problem. Um, and then you're like, okay, well, great, I can send money, but actually can't receive any money, which is the, half of the equation usually. Um, and so this is what that inbound liquidity problem often is trying to solve is like, even if you open a Lightning channel, usually you that means you can then send those funds, but you can't actually receive. So you need someone to open a Lightning channel to you that has liquidity at the other end, so that they can send it to you when you're trying to receive. And so it's sort of like the last step of this onboarding flow from like learning about Bitcoin, getting Bitcoin, setting up Lightning, opening a channel, and I need to be able to, I can send money, but now I need to be able to receive money. And so it is it is like it's a big problem because it also requires a counterparty to lock up funds, right, with you. And that, locking up money costs them money that they can't use to invest elsewhere. And so um, in the long run, I think users are going to have to pay for this in some sense. And so you've probably heard the term like LSP or Lightning Service Provider, and these are services that are trying to help you with solve this problem for new users, basically. So um, I think what Breeze does actually, I guess we'll pick on Breeze since he wrote this article, but um, I think what they do is essentially they they do a couple cool tricks, which I don't know if we really want to go into, but they play a trick where they let you receive before you even have a channel, and they just make sure that that payment's going to be routed through one of their nodes, and then when their node sees that a payment is coming to you, they open a channel to you on the fly, assuming that the payment that you're receiving is large enough so that they can take a small fee. So basically, they'll take a small fee, but then allow you to receive instantly. So they solve this kind of receiving liquidity problem that way. Um, and it's really smooth experience, but it does require the payments to be routed through them, and it requires you to pay a small fee, which I think is going to be required because, again, like I mentioned, unless there's kind of some kind of like I can't say that word, a some kind of node who wants to just do it for like eat the cost for the world for some reason. It costs money to provide liquidity, and so with that said, I think all of this does get back to sort of the core focus of Sensei and why I think why I want to help differentiate it from some of the other node providers, or what I think is an important problem to solve is a lot of um, these onboarding issues and making sure that Sensei almost acts like an LSP or provides a lot of the services that wallet providers or other businesses or entities might need to provide a smooth Lightning experience for their users. And so there's a lot of cool tricks like the one I mentioned that Breeze does. I know that Phoenix and Moon Wallet all have their own set of tricks. You probably, I don't know if you've used those wallets, but they're all trying to make the onboarding experience for users as seamless as possible. And so I think having a node where um, that's sort of first class and a lot of these features can be kind of standardized and provided out of the gate would be really helpful for the ecosystem.
And to go back to what you said earlier on that point, you guys will start more as like uh, desktop only, or will you be going into the mobile game? Um,
Definitely want to explore mobile. Mobile is obviously more difficult. It's more resource constrained and it's not really always online. Um, well, maybe it's always online, but the app isn't always open. And so it presents um, a lot of its own challenges when operating on Lightning, which needs to be essentially always on. Not, it doesn't need to be always online, but you need to be online to receive, and you need to be online periodically to make sure people aren't cheating. Um, and so, yeah, for now, it's just a binary that you can run on Windows, Linux, or Mac. But there's no reason. I think what will come before a mobile app is interoperability with apps like Zeus, like the remote control apps. So you'll be able to connect your Sensei node or a lightweight child node to Zeus, a mobile app, and be able to control it that way. Same thing for like Ride the Lightning and Thunder Hub. There's no reason that a connector can't be built for those, so you can kind of remote control your node that way. And in that sense, you could probably do it on mobile. But I think it does warrant, because of some of these onboarding tricks. I think a mobile client is probably on the roadmap for sure. It's definitely not the highest priority at the moment, though.
that's cool to know that. Well, obviously it's part of Lightning Network, so you'll be able to connect it to Zeus and some of these others. But that's really cool. Um,
Hmm.
so here's the interesting thing. Then you mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, but maybe dive in a little bit more. So you on the website it talks about Sensei utilizing the utility of the Bitcoin development kit and the flexibility of LDK, the Lightning development kit. So what
Hmm.
exact utility are you talking about in the elements of flexibility?
Yeah. Yeah, those adjectives probably aren't the best, and they can obviously apply to both. I think that was sort of just like a maybe like a third pass on that copy, but yeah, I probably it's probably not the best, but yeah, basically the idea is that these two projects, if you're a developer who's interested in Bitcoin or Lightning, you definitely need to go check them out. But I can try to give a high level overview of each one. And so the Bitcoin Development Kit, or often abbreviated BDK, is a library that provides a set of like abstractions and tools that make developing Bitcoin applications and wallets much simpler. And by that, I mean it handles a lot of the complexity, like the low level complexities and details that you probably don't want to re-implement from scratch. Because, when you're dealing with people's money, you don't want to make mistakes. You don't want to have security holes. You don't want to have bugs where people can lose money. It's just something you want to avoid at all costs. And so utilizing something like BDK um, makes sure, well, it's not a 100% guarantee. Obviously, nothing really is in this world, but you're not the one, you might not be an expert in the low level Bitcoin transaction like serialization formats or how to sign the transaction correctly or how to select UTXOs or how to generate, addresses from a descriptor. Like there's just endless amounts of complexity that gets to be hidden when you use something like the Bitcoin development kit and building a wallet. Like it lets you basically just plug in a few things like where do you want to get your chain data from Bitcoin Core or from Electrum or from Explora. And then you can kind of describe how you want your wallet to be in terms of these descriptors. And then it handles pretty much everything else from there. It lets you generate addresses. It helps you construct transactions. It helps you sign transactions. It helps you broadcast transactions. It helps you manage your UTXOs. And it basically does almost everything for you. And so you can spend the time focused on your actual application and what makes your application interesting instead of worrying about the low level details of interfacing with the Bitcoin network. And the Lightning Development Kit LDK is pretty similar in concept. It's basically, I could say a lot of the same things, but basically there's a lot going on under the hood with Lightning, right? There's all the protocol level specifications and all the communication back and forth with the peers and all the channel management, channel construction, updating the channel, maintaining all the like state as the channel gets updated, monitoring the chain for people cheating or for the channel closing for the, so there's just a lot going on. And so the idea is that the Lightning Development Kit makes it so that the developer doesn't need to worry about all of that. They can just, it provides, again, these high level abstractions, these components. They have objects like channel manager or network graph, like things that are a lot easier for you to wrap your head around, and you don't really have to worry about how they're implemented internally, unless you do, unless you care and you want to, add functionality or do something slightly differently. But for the most part, if you just want to add Lightning or Bitcoin to your application, these are great tools to lean on because they're constantly being developed and iterated on, adding new features, fixing bugs, and it's two full teams that you can rely on without you don't have to do the work yourself. So it's an awesome asset to the ecosystem. They're both written in Rust, but you don't actually have to be a Rust programmer to use them. So they both are focused on providing language bindings to popular languages like Java or even JavaScript and C Sharp. And so you can go ahead and continue programming in the language that you already know and already building your application with, and should be able to plug into these libraries pretty seamlessly.
Now, these libraries, are they being maintained mostly by the Spiral Bitcoin team, or is it more of an open project?
Yeah, so they're definitely open projects. I don't think Spiral wants to say that they're not they're not really Spiral projects, right? They're open source projects started by other people, and Spiral does fund several developers who work on these projects.
Okay.
So I think it sometimes gets misconstrued that this is like Spiral's project and it's their thing and they, whatever they say goes. But no, it's not. They're just helping fund them because they think that they're important projects to help the developer ecosystem grow.
Thanks for that clarity. I was unclear on, like, was it
Mhm.
open or is it Spiral led? But it sounds like they're funding a lot of the people who are maintaining both of these projects.
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, those people do spend, all their time working on these projects. So it is in some essence like, I don't know how you want to define it. I don't think there's no one at Spiral been like this is what we need to do for this project. It is community based. They have weekly calls. You can hop on and see what's going on and see what's being worked on. And if you're a user of one of these projects, they're both very open to suggestions and contributions. So it's definitely not a closed system at all, or like being completely directed by Spiral. Though they are extremely helpful in funding the development of them.
Okay, that's great to know. So I'm a fan of Spiral's just mission and that sort of thing. I just didn't know
Yeah.
in our according to our conversation around trust models, like how much trust are we placing But the fact these are open source, that's another big win.
Yeah, it's something a lot of people like to harp on, like, oh, if one company's funding all Bitcoin development, isn't that a threat model? And it is, it's a threat model, but or it's a threat, I guess. But in this case, there are non-spiral contributors, and like you said, it's open source. So if you don't like a direction the project is going and you can't change it for some reason, then go ahead and fork it and do whatever you want. Yeah.
Yeah, because Spiral also is not the only organization out there funding open source developers and development
Yep.
on Bitcoin and Lightning. So,
That's right. Yep.
well, great. So I asked some people on Twitter, or I just threw it out there that we were recording, and if there were any questions. I had one come in from my friend Brian. He's at Brain Harrington on Twitter. He noticed that this isn't just Lightning nodes for individuals. You also mentioned on the website that like a business entity could spin up their own node.
Mhm.
And so one of his questions, he's very much a get on zero kind of guy, but also realizes you live in a world where accounting has to take place. So he was wondering what, if any, measures you have implemented potentially into the node for accounting, or would you kind of do that separately?
hmm Yeah, it's a good question, and it's common. I've heard this multiple times, and I've seen it in different Lightning like ecosystem like discussions. But yeah, today there's no accounting being done, though all the all of the invoices that are generated and paid and everything are being logged in the database. So there is like a full trail of everything that's happening, but there's no report that's going to be generated that the IRS is going to be satisfied with. But it is actually something I'm interested in working on. I mean, as odd as that sounds, I think it is something that is very needed and helpful for businesses that want to operate on Lightning, or just in Bitcoin in general, right? Every transaction that happens needs to be the price, like the current price. You need to have a price source, and you need to know, a fiat price, I guess is what I meant. And yeah, I think adding that functionality is definitely um, on my roadmap. It wasn't the highest priority because it's not sexy. Well, maybe it is to some businesses, but
Might
to
be.
most normal people, yeah, it's not the most sexy feature. But to that general question of like, is this for businesses? That is an angle I am excited to explore also because of uh, one angle that I think is interesting is that LDK is also sort of focused on the enterprise in some sense because they're one of their biggest customers, which was recently announced. Oh, I don't know, customer, but user is Cash App, which is a huge enterprise serving millions of users. And so a lot of I'm not sure if this is fair to say a lot, but some of the features and functionality that are prioritized are based on the users of LDK, where Cash App happens to be one of the users. And so they are working on a bunch of interesting features for large enterprises like Cash App. And so I'm excited that I'll be able to adopt those features into Sensei relatively easily because it's built on top of LDK. And so that is one of the nice things about LDK in general and Sensei in general is that I'll be able to get a lot of the features and functionality that get put into LDK for free in Sensei because, just because I'm using it. And so there are a lot of interesting features coming in terms of that will help with the sort of reliability and uptime and things that are really important for enterprises running Lightning.
Well, now that's an interesting angle right there. Like hooking into LDK, who also has Cash App, probably because of the overlap between Spiral being a part of Block,
Right.
Cash App being a part of Block.
hmm
But now, yeah, that business use case. I think there are some providers out there, but it's very interesting that you'll be
hmm
benefiting through this open source nature of LDK in the same way that like Cash App will benefit. Um, that's
That's exactly, yeah. That was sort of one of my main drivers, other than the fact that I really wanted to work with BDK and LDK, was that it's exciting that I don't have to worry about a lot of this low level details, and I can just kind of take them and build cool things with it. And so that's sort of what one of the main visions behind Sensei is to kind of run with all the cool stuff that they're going to be able to put into LDK.
the power of open source.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Well, John, kind of to land the plane maybe on this conversation, this podcast, Changing the Tide, the idea is that there's been a tide with fiat money and I think general government overreach, you just worldwide. But we're even seeing it now in the Western nations more clearly. It's been there for decades, but it's coming out into the open. The idea is that Bitcoin and now Lightning are two aspects, two gravitational forces that can really change the tide, bringing more power back to the individual. So I wanted to give you some time at the end, kind of on this theme. You've talked a little bit about it, but maybe a nice packaging of how is Sensei changing the tide towards just I guess more individual sovereignty.
Yeah, I guess, well, the obvious answer, I guess, is around this idea, this focus on making it easy for new people to get onboarded, right? If people in these countries where they need their financial system is suppressing them or censoring them or making it so they so they can't transact and purchase the goods and services they need, Bitcoin is a potential answer there for them, and it needs to be there for them when they need it. And so for that to be true, it needs to be easy to use as well, right? If it requires them to be a sysadmin to go buy groceries, well, who are we really helping then? And so I think this one model of lightweight, easy to use child nodes where someone in your community can help you get started and can help their community escape, exit whatever oppressive system they happen to find themselves in. I think that is a really interesting model, and could give a lot of people some hope, that they don't need to be the expert themselves. They just might need to know someone who is. And with that said, there's also going to be, if they don't, maybe there'll be some places they can turn to that can help them get started in a more custodial fashion.
That's really cool. When will Sensei be available? Is it available now, or is that
It's a good
coming soon?
question. Technically, it's available if you're a sysadmin. Yeah, so I was a little nervous. It's always a little nerve-wracking releasing software that people put their money on, because you never know if you have some big issues or big bugs that can cause people to lose money. And so I'm nervous about uh, letting people be reckless, as people like to say in Lightning. And so for now, if you go to the its GitHub page, you can download the source code and you can compile it and run it yourself. And I sort of felt like if you know enough to do that, then you should understand the risks involved in putting real money on it. So I would not recommend doing that today. Go ahead and play around with it on your own local reg test network or maybe on testnet. In probably in a month or two, I'll feel more confident in releasing binaries for the world to use on mainnet. And when that happens, you'll see it available on things like Umbrel's App Store, and you'll be able to get it on Raspberry Blitz and a lot of those node in the box solutions. My plan is to distribute it that way because I think those are the target users. If you're running one of these node in a boxes at home, then it also means you already have a Bitcoin core running, and so that's also a dependency of the project. So yeah, so hopefully in a month or two you'll see the binaries released for people who want to run it that way, and at the same time, hopefully it'll roll out on a bunch of those app stores.
Cool. Yeah, that's exciting. Last question. Since you
Mhm.
mentioned it's open source, are you willing to share the license, the open source license of Sensei?
Yeah, it's Apache, and it's dual license, just like the BDK and LDK projects.
Okay.
So it's licensed under Apache and an MIT open source license, which I I don't actually know the exact details of it to go ask your lawyers, but
Yeah.
I think it basically means you can use it for pretty much anything.
Okay. Cool. I know there have been a lot of fights over open source software in this community over the past
Yeah,
year or so, and so
yeah. I just kind of mirrored what BDK and LDK were doing and assumed that that was probably a good way forward. But if I'm wrong, someone let me know.
I'm sure they will. I'm sure
Yeah,
they will if they hear this. So
Yeah, for sure.
Well, John, as we head out here, really appreciate your time. Very excited about your project. And is there anything else we haven't covered that you felt like you wanted to talk about? I want to leave that door open for you.
Um, Not too much. I guess I would just mention a little. I don't know if it's like a teaser or just some other things I'm thinking about. The reason I called it L2, which I'm now considering renaming because I keep getting flack from people saying, well, it's too hard to know how to spell it or how to write it. It's so many L2s. But the idea was that I didn't want it to be entirely lightning focused, because I think that in the future, Lightning is just going to be one of hopefully many layer two options that we have. And so I'm also investigating things like state chains and the federated Chalmian E-mints and Liquid and uh, Nostra. So there's just lots of other projects going on that are kind of on like not layer one Bitcoin. And I'm open to how they might contribute to helping accelerate the adoption of Bitcoin. And so um, I'm definitely exploring. A lot of those projects are a little earlier. They're not quite ready for mainstream usage like Lightning is. But that's something I have trying to keep a pulse on and make sure I'm ready to move when they are.
Cool. Well, awesome, John. Definitely want to have you back on down the road as well for updates. This
Cool.
has been great, and thanks for contributing to the space.
Of course, yeah. Happy to come back next time I have a big announcement or something to share with the world.
Oh, and I will include it, but plug away. Where can people find you and your projects?
Sure. The best way is probably my Twitter, so at John Cantrell 97. My DMs are open. I usually try the best I can to respond. I also have a link on the L2 website, l2.technology, to a Discord server, and that's where a lot of the discussion around Sensei is happening. So if you have questions or need support, you can go there to ask, or if you want to help and contribute to the project, um, it's a good place to come hang out and talk with me and other people who are excited about the project.
Cool. All right, everyone, go check it out. All right, John. Thanks again.
Sure, thanks for having me.
How sick is that, Sensei? Being able to spin off child nodes into their own full parent node that can then teach others, and how that contributes to freedom and prosperity worldwide, especially in oppressive places where your bank account is shut down, or you hold an unpopular opinion on politics, religion, you name it, and all of a sudden you don't have access to your money. I'm very excited about this particular open source implementation of Lightning Network, and just adding another one into the mix to further decentralize Lightning Network and how you can interact with it. Just a very exciting project to keep tabs on. So I will definitely have John on when there are big updates going forward. I think one of the interesting things beyond that is just you can tell his passion for onboarding new Lightning users, and how that is actually going to be just the accelerant overall, not only for Bitcoin adoption, but then if you read some of his threads on Twitter, how that's actually going to push the price up. It's going to actually lead to the money, the Bitcoin and Lightning networks gaining in value more quickly. And so that's an awesome piece too. I just read that article from Roy Scheinfeld at Breeze today on liquidity being the current major resource scarcity constraint for Lightning Network growth going forward. And so to have John talk a little bit about the liquidity piece too was fantastic. If you have questions, please go to l2.technology. Follow John at John Cantrell97 on Twitter. Through l2.technology, you can reach the Discord channel and stay up to date with that particular project. But yeah, I'm excited. John and L2 are changing the tide for sure. And until next time, I hope you guys stack sats and keep those hands strong. Don't worry about that fiat price, that fiat exchange price. That is not what is the big deal on Bitcoin, as you can tell from this particular show and those that have come before it. The ability to have an open monetary standard is the killer app of Bitcoin and Lightning. Until next time, stay well.